We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
I'm Dr. Joli Hamilton, and you're listening to the Mankind podcast.
Looks like the rain has gone.
G'day and welcome to the Mankind podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Clift, and welcome to the show, where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there's more than just one way to be a man. And if it's your first time joining us, know that this is a space where men can come to learn about themselves and get away from the magnifying glass of the media, get out of the spotlight so that we together can support one another through our growth, and so that we can become better allies for those of us that are different from us, the women in our lives, the children, those that don't identify by a specific gender. How can we step up as men and help write a new narrative of what it means to be a man? Now, one of the most common conversation topics that I think we across the board want to avoid is the conversations around sex. Because how I was raised to understand sex, how you were raised to understand sex, it's all going to be different, right? All of our differences are going to be unique. Yet, sex is one of those topics that has so much weight to it. It's one of those topics that we feel like the stakes are high if we're going to even broach the subject, depending on the environment that we're in and who's in that environment. And so what I wanted to do was bring in Dr. Joli Hamilton, who in my mind is one of the world's best at normalizing and simplifying one of the most multifaceted topics that we have on our minds and our hearts. And so for you, the listener, if you feel like you haven't really broadened your horizons enough, that you have a very linear view of sex, you're going to enjoy this interview because we're going to expand that view. And for those of you out there that feel like some of your sexual feelings, desires, urges aren't a part of that linear narrative, that your household, your church, your school, your community shunned anyone who had those same feelings and beliefs around sex, well, you may just find a home in this conversation. You may just finally feel normal and that your sexual urges and desires, in fact, aren't or may no longer be taboo. So this is a fun one. This is easily one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. And so I hope you, the listener, are ready to open your mind and join this conversation as we dive into sex and shadow. Enjoy. Let's talk about sex, Joli. Welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And usually I get sung in with a different song. I'll take that one. I like it.
I'm curious, what are the different songs you get sung into?
My given name is Jolene, so I get a lot of Dolly Parton angled my way.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, I don't complain. I don't complain.
Oh, gotta love Dolly. What a saint.
Exactly.
Well, for those listening, today is all about shadow in sexuality. What we call it for short, sexual shadow. And so I couldn't have found a better person for this this deep dive really into a subject that is taboo in so many cultures and so many communities. So Dr. Joli Hamilton, thank you so much for being here. Just a bit of background from the research I've found. You've got a doctoral degree in depth psychology specializing in Jungian and archetypal studies. So really, like, this whole process has been a lot about Jung and Jung's work. And so suffice to say that we have the perfect combo between us to really dive into today's topic.
Yeah. Studying Jung has been a huge, huge gift to my life. So I'm super glad whenever somebody's ready to dive in this direction.
Oh, what a dude.
Yeah, exactly. And I like to say we can build. Jung said we are supposed to dream the dream onward. Let's do that today. Perfect. The audience will get something if we do that.
Oh, I'm so excited and nervous. Like, I got to definitely speak to the nerves because, sexuality is, and I think it's got to be said that, there's a double meaning to sex, the word sex, that I think society has kind of made us force the two together, right? So there's like the act of sex, and then there's one sexuality, and then we use it as a way to describe gender or assign gender. So how often have you run into that, having to kind of uncouple that meaning and those two different meanings?
Okay, so I unpack this on a daily basis. Unpacking the word sex is one of the first things we can do if we want to actually actively do our sexual shadow work. Recognizing that the culture has taught us to see the word sex as both taboo and very, very interesting and intriguing, right? So it's already going to come with some tension. And then we have to do these machinations to understand, okay, we have sex, we have an act of sex, we have sexuality, which covers actually a whole host of identities and actions and behaviors. And then we have the old use of the word sex, like what is your sex? We have to separate that from gender, the gender identity, the gender expression that someone has, and what they were assigned when they were born. We have to tease all of these things apart. And the way that I do that is I start off by saying, would you define sex for me? And that helps me work with a person one-to-one or in a group setting. I teach this when I teach, freshman human sexuality. What is sex? Your answer will be correct for you. And yet recognizing that each of our answers, I've sat in rooms full of hundreds of sex therapists, educators, counselors, they all wind up writing down something different. We actually don't have a unified definition of sex. So don't be surprised if you disagree with other people. And that's the first thing that we do. And I find that's one of the most helpful things is for people to let go of the idea that they need to know all the answers. It's okay if you don't know. I don't know all the answers. None of us do.
And especially all throughout history, as we've progressed as human beings, we've always tried to find answers, right? We're trying to find the truths, the black and white in everything. And sex seems to be one of those things that whether it's large religious organizations or, different countries around the world, they really there's this mass effort, it seems, to really pin down sex as something that is black and white, or that has boundaries and barriers as to what is right and what is wrong. So I'd love to kind of peel back the layers between sex and identity and desire. And I think if we can achieve that today,
well, we've done something.
Yeah, we've done something. I think the conversation alone, I think, is going to be helpful for many people listening, because the more I've researched into sexual shadow, the more I've found just how much of a hold it has on so many of us. Just in my time, the 5 years I've been involved in men's work, I've seen just how much shame or stigma or whatever story someone has in their head around sex, how much of a hold that has had on them. And it makes me think about all the tyrants in the world, all the leaders that are harming and hurting people. I mean, how many of them were just getting caught jacking off to the wrong magazine, right?
Yeah.
J. Edgar Hoover as an example. I mean, just the witch hunt on people that were, non-heterosexual, then he himself was gay. So I'm curious, where do we begin in our early development? What is the influence, right, where we kind of build our beliefs around sex? Where does that begin?
Yeah. So let's start with the body. You're born into a body. You're born of a body, right? Through some sort of sexual act, even if that's in a petri dish, some sort of connection, right? You appear on this earth here and you start being a mouth breather, and that's great. And then society has its way with you. There is no one single answer about where you start being influenced around sex. Your parents, absolutely, your caregivers, your siblings, every situation. And we live in an image-rich environment. If there are images all around you, it's really, really easy to take in and assign meaning to what you're seeing. In other words, if you see a breast and you assign it meaning, right? You assign it a sexual meaning. Well, it can take on one sort of tone and texture. If you see a breast and you assign it a different meaning, maybe you assign it the meaning of feeding and food, you get a different tone and texture. Meaning's not going to come from one place, but absolutely we have the problem of our general cultural milieu is tilted towards shaming around sex while also using sex to sell us a lot of things. We're caught in a bind between this deep want, this desire, something that is very, pulls most of us, because there are those who don't experience desire as a natural thing. We're pulled between that and the push of, no, that's bad. This isn't good. Look away. Or if you find this intriguing, you are bad. And that's when it gets really mucky. Mm. If something is desirous and you feel bad all of a sudden, now shadows in play.
Wow. That intersection, right, between what is like this natural, primal, carnal urge, whether it's looking up pornography or, just watching someone look down the street and feeling that sexual urge when we see someone that we find attractive. And then from the other side, the stories in our heads around that is wrong, that is right. It's that intersection, I feel like, where I'll lose control.
Control.
And find myself kind of lost in the middle, right? So what about I want to get to the control part, but what is it about that intersection that catches so many people?
Well, I think when we're talking about sex, we're talking about something that it speaks to us on a root level. It speaks to us on a deeply unconscious bodily level, right? And yet it always happens in the context of us living in this culture. We can't actually separate out these two things. So the way you were raised, of course, it's going to impact how you experience sexuality, whether you are laden with, a lot of sexual shame or perhaps have less sexual shame. I think the most important part is to remember that the shame that you feel is untangleable. Everything is talk aboutable. And when we can discuss sexuality the same way we would discuss, say, anger or sadness, we can shed light on the shadow and begin to access its immense capacity for our individuation process, for our growth, for our development.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you said disentangle, because that seems to be a place where it's a dichotomy in sense of trying to disentangle sexual behavior, sexual urges from emotional behavior.
Yeah.
Right. I know many, including myself, have had sexual experiences, and rather than be in the moment and present with it and all of its wonder and beauty, but have that little voice in the back of the head going, what are you doing? This is wrong. And all of a sudden it becomes a story of self-worth.
Right.
And I'm inherently bad because I've done a bad thing, right?
Right. So let's speak right to that then. When you feel sexual arousal for you, if you can tune into your body and just notice the first hints of arousal, which again, I just want to say, it's okay if you don't ever experience spontaneous arousal. We pathologize that a lot. We say, all dudes always get horny, like that. Like we say that, but that's not true. If you're a person who experiences spontaneous arousal, which is the majority of people, or of people assigned male at birth, at least, if you do, and you automatically tie that to any sort of sense of this is bad or this is wrong, digging back into those early memories through shadow work, through sitting in circle with people who can witness with you, those early memories where you may have been incidentally or accidentally. Many times our parents or our caregivers didn't mean to shame us, but we were shamed early, and that message really took root. So let's say, for instance, I've heard numerous stories of people who've had a particular toy taken away from them very, very young. And later, years later, when unpacking their sexual shame, they realize, oh, I was masturbating with that toy. I was grinding on it, or I was using it in some way. And it wasn't my toy. I was having my pleasure taken away. I was shamed for feeling pleasure in my body. Ooh, okay. So if you're, 30, 40, 50, 60, and you're just realizing that that's why you lost your teddy bear or your blanket. Yeah. One, ouch. I witnessed that. I hear you. And now you have the keys to start engaging with that pleasure and separating the shame from it and allowing the shame to sit to the side and simply observe it at first. Don't try to repress it, because pushing it into the shadow, it's like pushing a beach ball underwater. It's going to pop up somewhere. So just keep a conscious eye on it carefully.
Well, let's link sex and the shadow now, because, if those of you who have been listening up to this point in our series on the shadow, you know that the shadow is developed as a survival mechanism, right? To give us ways to get by and meet the needs that we're somehow not getting from a young age. And you mentioned before, the 10, 20, 30, 40, 60 years, right, that these shadows, especially around sex, can be inside of us that we're not aware of, that keeps turning up and pulling the strings in our lives. I want to just zoom out for a second from the micro and look at the macro. In your experience and with the people that you've worked with, can you identify some macro impacts on society as a whole, as far as how sexual shadow might be at play at a greater degree?
Yeah, sure. We see it at play all the time. One, people lean out, they lean away from pleasure. And forget that feeling arousal doesn't mean an action needs to happen, right? So you could feel arousal and simply experience that as a pleasurable experience. But that's not what happens. Shame happens instead. So at a cultural level, or at the level of large groups, at the very least, what we have is people leaning away from pleasure, leaning into work, leaning into productivity, leaning into all the right things, all the things that are supposed to be good. And at root, it worries me that when we lean that far away from pleasure, just the general pleasure of being a sexual being, that we collectively lean toward things that are hard for their own sake, like hard for hard's sake, challenging for challenging's sake, right? Like, and that generally doesn't serve the individual, and it generally doesn't serve true relating. It does serve a general sense of controlling a populace. If you want to talk about, a way to control a population, control their pleasure.
Yeah.
This is why pornography is a big discussion amongst large controlling bodies like governments and heads of churches, right? Because if some entity can stand there and say, this is good and this is bad, if they can box your behavior and your want into those two places, they've got you, and they've got you by the jewels. They've literally got you. So, yeah.
It's interesting, and this is in no way me calling out any religion or faith specifically, but sexual shame that has been built up within organized religion and beliefs. It's been sad to witness how many men, just from a man's lens, how many men have carried that into such remarkably dysfunctional habits and behaviors, trying to hide this part of themselves, because not just their parents, not just their bishop, not just their preacher, but God, the all-seeing eye, is telling them, you are wrong. This is wrong. Where in another culture, 10,000 miles away, it's completely normal, completely natural. There's no taboo around it. There's no shame. And we see this perpetual loop of just shaming and inherited pain around these conversations around sex. I want to ask you, how do you initiate and call in someone who is carrying this weight of this shame when you talk to them? Or how would you encourage others to invite them into a conversation around this stuff?
Yeah. One of the things I do because it depends on the context, of course. But one of the things I do is I live in in a very open stance. So I embody what I want other people to be allowed to embody. In other words, a sense of being at home in their sexuality, whatever it may be. I work on that from my side of the street, because in my experience, I can't take someone's shame away. I can only invite them to see that it is possible for them to set it down. So I try to model, and then I use inquiry. I ask people, when did you first feel this way? When did you first come across the idea that masturbation was wrong? Like, when did that come up for you? Because it happens. And I usually open the door through those sorts of questions. When did this first happen to you? Or do you remember a time when you really felt hurt about your sexual wants? And I ask them to tell me their stories. Usually in our stories, there are the gold nuggets. They're the places where we were ashamed, or even if we were just pro-socially guilted. Perhaps we were masturbating in a public area as a little child, right? And somebody says, hey, that's for a private space. Even that's a pro-social guilt. I would not say that a parent is wrong for doing that at all. And yet it could be internalized as shame. It could be internalized differently. So I ask them to share those stories. And when we finally bring those stories out into the light and just share them, often everything's ready to crack open and really see the light. Then it's getting that first little fissure, just that little bit.
Joli, I think that speaks to the importance of going through this journey, being guided, right? Finding that mentor, that counselor, that therapist, that expert that can help with the unpacking process, peeling back those layers, because it's very hard for me to see my shadow when I'm inside it. When I'm enveloped in it, right? Yeah, it's hard to see that objective view, like to be able to zoom out and go, this is what's going on. That's why someone like myself, who's deeply involved in men's work, can, in the same breath, give someone advice and guidance on the exact same thing I'm going through, but I can't see it even in myself.
Yeah.
And so
the beauty of projection.
The beauty, bingo. If you spot it, you got it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to sex, I think you've hit on something. If you don't know where to turn to start unpacking this, you could begin with simply looking at what riles me up? What am I angry about other people's sexuality? What pisses me off? Where can I just not stand that? Okay, cool. You want to show up to do your work? Look in the mirror. You don't have to look for, how am I exactly like that? Where does it resonate? Where's it pinging off of you?
Oh, that's actually something I didn't come prepared to ask you, but that is something I would love to get your thoughts on. One of the most common opposing forces, I believe, in sexual expression is in the LGBTQ plus community. Right? We have these big Mardi Gras celebrations. We have these pride parades. And we often hear the comments of those that go, this is just wrong. It's too much. It's in my face. Like, why? And I hear this comment frequently. I don't care what they do. They can do what they want. But why do they have to, shove it in my face so we all have to see it? And so how can we invite a conversation to those who are going, well, this is too much? And why is it that you feel that when these LGBTQ plus folk finally have that chance to express, do it in such a large way?
Yeah, this comes up in my life all the time. So I am a queer polyamorous mom of 7, happened to be married to a cisgendered man. So I look like I fit in all the boxes, but my life is actually very complicated. What I say to people is, when we are bothered by someone else's expression of love or pleasure, we have an opportunity to take very seriously out what our intention is. What if I am bothered by someone else's experience and expression of love or pleasure, and however they're doing that, simply ask yourself the question, would you be bothered by that happening between a straight couple or a cisgendered person or whatever? If you run up against some trouble there, okay, cool. You have a line of self-inquiry. You don't have to jump the fence into like some sort of perfect understanding of somebody else's life. You could just say, oh, I don't think I get their life. I don't think I understand it. And just stand in that mystery of, I don't think I totally understand how their life has gone. And so, okay, I'll reserve pointing that judgment outward. Now, another important piece of this is there are many people who simply believe that sexuality should be private. All kinds of sexuality, all kinds of pleasure. If you happen to be a very private person, so let's say you lead a pretty, like culturally very neutral, like very accepted life. All your identities just sort of line up with the easeful path in this culture. But you still aren't you're not a person who's going to mouth kiss your partner like deeply in public, or you're not going to go to out to dinner and like be sitting like smashed up against each other and cuddling. Maybe you're just a really private person. Okay, cool. You get to be like that. But we have made the assumption that all of society needs to react to its pleasure and joy the same way we do. And so if you're a private person who's struggling with all this presentation of public pride and joy, we can still simply stay with the question like, oh, do I just like privacy? And remember that you still get to have yours. You get to have yours. And not everybody loves privacy. And that's what it is to be a social being. It's dealing with people who do stuff differently. My brother loved to ride a motorcycle, and he would ride it so loud past my bedroom window, and it drove me bonkers. But that was his joy. He didn't ask me to ride the motorcycle. He just woke me up sometimes when I was annoyed by it. It's okay to disagree with someone and to still let them have their joy.
I'm so happy you've illuminated this, because in many of my conversations with previous guests, we've spoken about how the us first them mentality is such a destructive approach to working through something. Like if we look at like feminism and the men's rights movement, unless there's an inclusive idea of how to work through something, there's not going to be progress. It's only going to create more of a divide. Politics, them leftists and them, bloody Virginia rioters and blah, blah, blah. Right. It only creates more of a wedge and divide. Whereas if we can say, hey, I get you don't like these outward expressions of sexuality, and you know what? That's totally fine. Don't look at it.
This is it. So I came up against this when I was nursing my children. I'd be breastfeeding. Some people felt that was too public. They didn't want to see breast tissue in public. Another option is to simply look away. Just simply look away from something you don't like. And what I would say is, if you're still in the stage where looking away is the best option for you, remember that it's a kindness to yourself and to the other person. You can do that kindly. Are there other steps that I would love to see people take to move toward embracing joy and pleasure for everyone? Absolutely. But I'm far more concerned that we learn how to treat each other kindly and to negotiate living in a pluralistic society. We can live in a society that's just multifarious. That's how psyche is. That's like you are multifarious. You are a multitude. Every single one of you listening is made of a contradictory mess of stuff. And it's great that way. We're not trying to turn you into a one single thing. There isn't a right way for you to be, just like there isn't a right way for me to be.
Joli, are you telling me that things aren't black and white and I can't live in my borders and walls safe in all the black and whiteness?
You can, but the shadow will still get you. Shadow's still going to come for you. You're still going to wake up at night wondering why this hurts. And you're still going to wonder why in the world this life doesn't make sense. So you can stay there. It's not going to be comfy.
No. And this is such a common thread and theme I'm finding as I'm diving into this shadow stuff that you and many other guests have been joining me in these conversations for, is that it seems like without fail, it always comes back to embracing the gray area in all of this. That
Yes.
we can't pin anything down to be exactly what it is. That there's so many other facets and elements to it. I get asked this question frequently, both when I was living in Utah and now that I'm living in the South. People will ask me, do you believe that there are universal truths out there? And my answer's always been, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But my brain used to always get broken by that question because I'd try and come up with an answer to get them to like me or make myself sound smart. And I think that's what a lot of this is. You can go to someone who perhaps has never even spent a minute in a conversation around sexuality or issues around LGBTQ plus, challenges in society. They may not have even spent a minute having a conversation with anyone of an opposing viewpoint around that one topic, but they will spend 20 minutes on a rant to tell you everything that's right or wrong about it. And that's just the thing, right? We're very opinionated kind of beings trying to figure out our own form of black and white so that we can feel safe in this reality.
And you know what helps that? Relationship. Coming into actual connection with other people. Every year I have a class of sophomore students taking human sexuality. It's a community college. They're a diverse group of people. They usually range in age from 17 to about 50. Absolutely every year without fail, somebody makes a big ouch in the room. Somebody makes a bold statement, acclaims a universal truth, and forgets that two things can be true at the same time. And that doesn't mean that they're truth doesn't mean that that every other thing is false. And so the beautiful moment there is that when a student finally brings the big ouch into the room, or when it shows up in circle, that's the opportunity for them to recognize that, oh, I'm here with other people.
Yeah.
We all experience sex and sexuality differently. Literally every single one of us does. There is no one way. And so I don't have to approve of their sexuality any more than they need to approve of mine. We only need to know how to treat each other with kindness and to uphold a sense of forward motion together. We're a culture. We're a society. That's what we do.
Yeah. Kudos to all the ones big enough and bold enough to cause the ouches.
Yeah.
So long as they're willing to
stay in the conversation.
To stay in the conversation, right?
Absolutely.
And perhaps not double down on their point, but have maybe not a wantingness, but a willingness to be open that perhaps what they just said might have other dimensions to it. There might be another way to look at it.
That's exactly it.
As a serial oucher, and for those listening, an ouch is like, an example could be two dudes kissing is unnatural. Boom.
Right.
Someone in the room identifies with a non-heterosexual identity.
Right. Any number of orientations, and now
says, ouch.
Yeah.
You've just said something that hurts.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, yeah, the ouches there's so much gold and lessons in the ouches.
Yeah. And staying in relationship is challenging, but it only takes a split second of calling yourself back in to say, oh, right, I'm going to stay in my system, you stay in yours, and we're just going to be in conversation, and we'll figure out how to repair this rupture.
Well, and that's where it's so important, right? To not call someone out, but instead call them in to the conversation, because it's very easy as me, Brandon Clift, with my lens view of the world and my perception of what is actually happening in front of me, it's very easy for me to argue and attack all the people who disagree with what I disagree with. But calling them out is only going to put them on the back foot. It's only going to make them bite down on their mouthpiece and want to hit me back. Whereas, or it do harm and cause them to shrink and hide and disconnect from whatever possible relationship there could be. Whereas if I can call them in, easier said than done, but if I can call them into the conversation And I'm willing to be wrong.
Yeah.
Willing to learn something from their perspective. You know, I really loved meeting people in my life that have been very open, that when conversations around religion, politics, sexuality have come up, that they've been very open about their stance.
Yeah.
Regardless of where it's coming from, and very fervent in that stance. But they've never left the conversation. They've been willing to stay in the conversation. And I need to remove any of my attachment to them seeing my point of view or seeing what, you know, my group, let's just say, you know, what they believe to be
who I
right or
belong
wrong.
to.
Who I belong to. Yeah. Whether it's right or wrong, and for them to see that. But I can love them anyway. And I can have
Loving humanity is not easy, but that's it.
Bingo. Diametrically opposed on politics, diametrically opposed on religion, opinions on sexuality. But they're my friends and I love them.
Yeah. This is a big question. And when we talk about sex, we often shift over into this realm where we're like, there are so many differing viewpoints. And I always invite people back into that. Let's talk about the joys of it. Let's talk about the pleasures. What do you like? And I'm often one of the rare people in a given room that will say, tell me what you like. Seriously, tell me what is arousing to you, what's interesting to you, what gets your attention. Because when we can talk about sex with that kind of openness, it gives us access to parts of us that we didn't even know existed. You know, Jung said, oh gosh, what's the line? In whatsoever a man is involved, there his sexuality will appear too. Your sexuality will always be flowing around under there. And being able to identify it and talk about it with care is a deep way of sharing with another person.
And I think let's pull a thread there, right? Wherever those urges are, whatever the act is, you do a lot of work in education around kink and BDSM, and just give like a layman's overview of kink and BDSM.
Yeah, sure. So when people think about kink and BDSM, often their mind goes straight to 50 Shades of Grey.
Chains and whips.
Right. Okay. But let's broaden the definition. So when we're talking about kink, we're really talking about, it's a subjective thing. So BDSM, bondage, dominance, sadism, masochism. When we're talking about specific acts, we have to remember that kink is how it is for you. There is no singular spectrum of not kink to kink. Yeah. I will often have people do an exercise where I'll label a whole bunch of different behaviors, like a lot of behaviors, like 50 or 60 different sexual behaviors. And I'll put them on a spectrum and I'll ask a group of people, okay, put these on this continuum, place them. Are they sex? Are they not sex? Are they kink? Are they not kink? Watch everybody lose their minds, realizing that what's kinky for one person might not be kinky for another. Yeah. So I can't give you a clear definition, but I can tell you that kink is the stuff that gets you excited, gets your motor running, that you feel a little twisted up about, and you kind of like that twist. So when I work with people about kinks, I'm not trying to unkink the hose. I'm trying to help them understand how they can do it safely and in really deep consent with other people or on their own, safely and within alignment to themselves. Just because something's taboo doesn't mean we have to beat ourselves up about it.
And that seems to be the kind of way kink and BDSM and it has been painted, right? Yeah. Movies like 50 Shades of Grey and common opinions like around, you always see like the dominatrix in the leather or the gimp suit, right?
Sure.
that it's always painted in this light of really being on the edge.
And very extreme.
Very extreme. Exactly. Very extreme. And we had a conversation a couple of days ago preparing for this interview. And I had spoken with someone I'd met in the past who was involved in sex work. She isn't trafficked or anything like that. And she said she loves it. Like
Yeah.
outside of whatever other benefits she can gain for a lifestyle, she absolutely loves it. And I think that's something that not a lot of people understand, that there are certain people involved in sex work that are truly passionate about it.
There are plenty of people involved in sex work who are not trafficked, who are making a legitimate choice for themselves, and who are constantly having to fight for the right to interact with their body and their monetary system in a way that feels good for them. It is a complex issue, and I don't want to dismiss concerns about not just trafficking, but what it means to be coerced and what it feels like to be to need to do something for survival reasons. That's a very different thing than someone who wants to take ownership of their sexuality, live into it, and loves that aspect of their work. I also know sex workers who are like, it's a job. I don't like it. I don't hate it. It's just a job. When we can take a neutral stance on controversial topics like that, we can have a more nuanced conversation, find out that, in fact, the best ways to fight the real problems, the problems where like children are being harmed, is to understand that the issue is nuanced. It is not just one size is not going to fit all, and we're going to actually harm more people by doing that.
Yeah, the one size fits all approach is definitely, it's impossible to achieve and impossible to attain, and only going to cause pain.
For real. For real.
I want to ask you about or if you can help me draw the line between unhealthy sexual repression, especially if we're talking shadow stuff here, right? That hiding, repressing, denying. Are you able to draw the line between unhealthy sexual repression and healthy self-restraint?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay. This has a lot to do with your own integrity and having some conversations either with yourself. I mean, you could journal about this. You could sit with a knowledgeable helper. Sexual repression, the kind of sexual repression we're talking about when we're saying sexual shadow, it causes a certain self-harm, an injury to the self. So let's go back to like, what is the self, right? If the self, the capital S self, is this truly divine aspect of us, right? We don't want to injure the self, right? If the things that we are repressing, if the ways we are judging our sexual attractions, our proclivities, our interests are super harsh, that is an injury to self. That's different from when we are, showing sexual restraint. Hey, there is a lot of joy for some people in being celibate intentionally. So I ask people to reflect, and not just in a moment. This isn't a question you just answer today.
Sure.
This is a question you reflect on. What is your intention behind holding this back? Is it, you could be holding back, say, ejaculation with a very intentional purpose behind that, and not be self-harming, not be pointing a finger at yourself and saying you're bad, you shouldn't allow yourself to come. But you could also be holding that back because you're terrified to allow yourself to experience that release. These are very, very tender things to tease out of yourself. Struggling with it is real. It's not uncommon. I see it all the time. I see it in men of all ages, like from 13 to 90. That's the age range. I absolutely have spoken with men about this. Yeah. If you're concerned that you're repressing yourself, ask what your intent is.
So what I'm hearing you say is that there's no real line that can be drawn. It's up to the individual to ask those questions of like, what is the intention behind? I mean, I attempted the 30-day no FAP challenge. And those listening, no FAP is basically no masturbation, sex with self or others for 30 days. Well, at least the rendition that I attempted.
Yep.
It was
the most common one.
Yeah, it was tough. Really tough. Biologically, mentally, emotionally, was quite challenging. In fact, I wasn't able to make it the 30 days. And it's funny, I never investigated as to why I didn't. It's something that kind of just took over, and I eventually masturbated, and there you go. I'm like, well, guess I'm off the challenge now.
And I think of it the same way. So it's about intent. I've had clients say, I'm going to challenge myself to turn away from this particular material. Like maybe they want to change their pornography use, or maybe they want to experiment with any number of changes to their behavior, or a complete fast. What I want to know is, what's your intent? Why? Why do you think that this is the best way to go? Because often it's actually someone else's judgment, and I can hear it. Like they can hear it when they try to express to me what their reason is for participating in this. If it's simply to prove that you can, I mean, okay, but you could also go do Murph at CrossFit. What, like, I mean, there are a million things we can do to just prove we can. If you are attempting to gain mastery of self, sure, it's a way, but there are lots of ways, and there's so much junk around masturbation, around self-love, around allowing ourselves to really deeply enjoy our sex, that I am always a little suspicious when somebody says, I just want personal mastery. I say, show me where else is that showing up in your life? And then we'll talk about whether this is really what you want, so that you can be clear on your intent. You'll get more out of it too, even if you do it.
Yeah. That clarity of intent piece comes up so much in these conversations. Is if I'm looking to attain something, whether it's a deeper relationship, whether it's connection, to actually understand first, what is the intention behind taking this on. I definitely have had those moments with pornography that in the moment it feels so primal and so exciting, and like, oh, I'm going to really enjoy this, only to realize that I'm actually trying to numb and run away from, whether it's a responsibility, whether it's from a challenge in a relationship, that I'm actually numbing. There's been other times where I've walked away with no shame whatsoever, no inquiry. I'm just like, oh, cool, that felt good.
Yeah. So what if we thought about, is this, even in the numbing, we could divide it into two categories. Is this mindful numbing, where I need a break and I'm consciously choosing to take it in this way? Or is this mindless numbing and running away and avoidance? And is there something deeper? And that is the more common one, right? Mindful numbing is something we have to actively participate in and say, oh yeah, okay, I'm giving myself this treat. That's great for me. I love it. And I'm all for that.
Great distinction there. I've never thought of numbing any other way than just some form of running and avoidance. So great distinction. Thank you for illuminating.
It's okay
that.
to take a vacation from your challenges sometimes. It really is. Rest is not the enemy.
Hey, babe, just taking a 20-minute vacation. I'll be right back.
Yeah, exactly. That is it. I have definitely taken some 20-minute vacations before. That has happened.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Joli, I mean, this could have been a 24-hour conversation. I'm so grateful for your time. I really just only have one final question for you. And it's related to a question that a previous guest, Martin Root, asked me. He wrote a book called Project Heaven on Earth, which is, what would heaven on earth look like for you, right? If you could just wave a magic wand. And I love that question. So I want to ask you, as it pertains to the conversation we've had today, and if you could wave that magic wand, what does heaven on earth look like for you, Joli?
I would absolutely allow us all to have a connection to our sexual self in an unbroken, unfettered way, like right from our birth forward. Shame-free sexual education, experimentation, and access to the things we need in order to maintain our bodily health and well-being. That would be glorious. And if I could put a cherry on top, it would be allowing people to be in community and talk about sexuality completely openly, no matter where they felt on any spectrum.
Wow. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Well, Joli, I sincerely hope this isn't the last time we get to connect. I know there's a million different threads that we could pull and go down. So I want to say until next time. But before we do that, would you mind taking a moment just to tell our listeners how we can find out more about you and your work?
Absolutely. The easiest place to find me is to pop on over to my website, jolihamilton.com, Joli, Hamilton, like the musical, nice and easy. And there people can find my book. I wrote a book called Project Relationship that's about putting your best foot forward in your relationship. And it's an action-centered book I am not about just staying in the talking forever. And you can download a great curiosity date. Might be of big interest to folks doing their work. The curiosity date is a way to connect with your person in a deeper way. It's free. You can grab it on my website and figure out a better date than just talking about work, kids, or the same old stuff.
Yeah. Beautiful. Oh, well, Joli, thank you so much for this time. It's been wonderful. And for those listening out there, I hope you guys have felt an opportunity or experienced a chance to broaden the conversation around sexuality as it pertains to yourself and the rest of the world out there. So thanks again, Joli. And for those listening, we will continue this conversation as we dive deeper into shadow. Hey guys, Brandon here. I just want to send you off with a humongous amount of gratitude and appreciation to all of you that turn up each week to listen to these episodes. We have just hit 10,000 downloads, and everything about this podcast has exceeded our expectations, and so that does not go unnoticed. Your feedback does not go unnoticed. If you want to give your say of where the direction should be for this podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out. Don't hesitate to, really just send us an email, because your opinion is important to us. What you want to hear going forward is important to us. It's very important to me. And so really, again, thank you so much, guys, gals, non-binary pals, whoever you are out there listening. This has been such an honor for my life to be a part of this project and to deliver these phenomenal stories and guests and insights to you. And so going forward, expect much of the same, but as you know, we're going to continue to hit that discomfort button. We're going to continue to have courageous conversations, and we're going to continue to prove that there's more than just one way to be a man. Lots of love, guys. This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. I have been your host, Brandon Clift, and I personally want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you make it a heck of a lot easier for us to let men out there in the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. Special thanks, of course, goes to my incredible team, Marketing and Communications Director Boyson Hodson, producer and editor of this episode, Michael Russo, who makes me sound so much more intelligent than I actually am, so of course, special kudos goes there. And if you've been enjoying the music throughout this episode and all of our episodes, check out Jim, Donovan, and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us, it happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.